Archives of Prasar Bharati presents the timeless treasure of golden era.
Hello and welcome to Living on the Edge. This week, our program travels to Gangotri in the Himalayas to see how the source of the Ganga is being increasingly polluted. We also present an in-depth analysis of the controversial GATT Accord to see what the future holds for India's trade, and travel to Gujarat to see how agricultural waste can be transformed into valuable fuel. But we begin with Gangotri in the Himalayas, a place of pilgrimage for those seeking the source of the Ganga. When our cameraman and associate producer S. Nalamuthu visited Gangotri, he was shocked to find that one of the holiest spots in the Himalayas was also one of the most polluted. Here's his story, which begins before man walked the earth and analyzes the troubled relationship between man and nature.
If the first images of Earth can ever flicker back to us, the idea that life as we know it could ever develop would seem impossible. And yet, from the beginning of time, the Earth has constantly evolved mechanisms that fuel life and cause it to ebb away. Like rivers that cut through land, seas that act as boundaries, and deserts that create divides. From the beginning, the Earth, like a mother, was the source of creation, but also of destruction. Man was once in awe of nature, even as he explored the Earth's vast frontiers. From being a creation of nature, man became its master. Instead of drawing sustenance from it, he aborted nature. The need for security saw man multiply, and an exploitative relationship with nature developed. But unexpectedly, nature hit back. Despite centuries of technological innovation, the age of miracles, it would seem, has failed to materialize. Nature may have been delivered into man's hands, but his social and economic systems are wrought by destruction. Poverty, disease, hunger, and want still predominate. Man has failed to read the writing on the wall, as survival brooks no compromise, even if it means subjugation of the earth and its creatures. But even as he continues to develop unsustainably, he still has some awe for creation. Is man being hypocritical, or is he confused? On the one hand, he's destroying nature. On the other, he equates it with God and wants to preserve it for future generations.
गणपतिगुं हवामहे कविं कवीनामुपमश्रवस्तमं ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मणस्पत आनः शृण्वन्नोतिभिः सीदसादनम् ॐ महागणाधिपतये नमः।
प्रणाम आगे गुरु पीछे हम लगे दम
ॐ अग्निहोत्रात्मने अङ्गुष्ठाभ्यां नमः ॐ दर्शपूर्णमासात्मने तर्जनेभ्यां नमः ॐ चातुर्मास्यात्मने मध्यमाभ्यां नमः ॐ नीलप्रतिबन्धात्मने अनामिकाभ्यां नमः ॐ ज्योतिष्ठोमात्मने कनिष्ठिकाभ्यां नमः.
From ancient times, Indians have worshipped the Himalayas as the source of the Ganga, considered the holiest river in the world. The Ganga also supports the agricultural activity of millions of Indians. Unfortunately, agriculture also implies the cutting down of trees, disruption in the development of an ecosystem, and the arrest of ecological succession. Much of this is inevitable. As inevitable as our dependence on the monsoons, which, if not stopped by the Himalayas, would have left much of India devoid of rain. Being the youngest mountain range, the Himalayas are still developing and have a fragile ecosystem, but civilization seems bent on destroying them. And paradoxically, the destruction is by pilgrims and trekkers, supposedly searching for peace, tranquility, and detachment. Even Gangotri, the holiest place in the Himalayas, is polluted as man leaves heaps of waste in the pursuit of religion. Plastic lives for 200 years, tin for 600, and glass for 1,000,000. The question is, will these mountains, already degraded by man, the focus of his inspiration and a source of his belief, survive for so long? Overpopulation and the quest for more has destroyed forests. Roads have scarred the hillsides, and millions of tons of topsoil that takes thousands of years to form have been lost as a result of deforestation. Change, it would seem, is causing the Himalayas to crumble. The Gangotri glacier, where the Ganga originates, has receded 2 kilometers in the last 45 years. Today, there are only 16 kilometers left. The Himalayas may be mighty, but the technology man can harness is mightier, and that makes mountains quite fragile. The degradation of the Himalayas is testimony to the short-sightedness of man, and unless the destruction ends, future generations may be unable to applaud the majesty of a range that has inspired millions for centuries.
Perhaps one way of halting the degradation of the Himalayas is to spread awareness about the problem and offer pilgrims and trekkers alternatives to existing facilities. Sunil Manoharan spoke to members of the Himalayan Environment Trust to see if a solution was possible.
I think there must be two very strong efforts must be made. One is the education of people so that they accept the responsibility to personally deal with the problem and the other is to make it easy for people to clean up their rubbish. There must be places that they can put it, places where it is taken away and properly disposed of. If you have these two things, people educated and making it easy for them to dispose of their rubbish, then I think big changes can be made.
हम तो कहते हैं कि इन्वायरमेंट प्रोटेक्शन ये फ़ी जो है ज़रूर होना चाहिए, वो ट्रैकर्स पे है या प्रिलिम्स पे है या फिर क्लाइंबिंग के जो लोग हैं, जैसे क्लाइंबिंग फ़ीस लिया जाता है तो वैसे ये भी बहुत ज़रूरी है, एकदम अटूट हिस्सा उसका होना चाहिए.
I think the pilgrims should not pay a tax in the Himalayas, but we should make it quite difficult to reach the holy places, so not everybody will go there. 20 years ago, when no road went up to Gangotri, a few hundred people a day came to Gangotri. Today the road is going to Gangotri and 3,000 people, also 5,000 people a day are going there, and this is too much. It's very simple. Maybe 500 up to 1,000 a day. It's okay, the place is good, the place is quite clean and quite big. But if they are coming in 10 years, 10,000 people, they will kill each other because they will be so aggressive for not having place, for being stuck on the road, that they do exactly the opposite, for which they go for searching. They go for silence, for beauty, for harmony. And what they find up there, dirty places, all full of horn concert and all full of bad buildings. The trees cut down. So that's the crazy thing.
That was Reinhold Messner ending on a somewhat skeptical note. Not all environmental problems, however, originate in the mountains. With India signing the GATT Accord, fears have been expressed that environmental concerns could become non-tariff barriers, that Indian industry might become less competitive, and that international patents will prevent us from exploiting our own biodiversity. Sunil Manoharan presents an in-depth analysis of the controversial GATT Accord.
Imagine a situation where India holds a global patent on basmati rice, where world trade is governed by a single agreement and our farmers produce grain for the international market at international prices. What seemed unimaginable a few decades ago is now within the realm of possibility, with India signing the GATT agreement in April. Almost 50 years in the making, the recently concluded 8th round of GATT intends to push up the volume of world trade by reducing tariff barriers. And with agriculture, investments, services, textiles, and intellectual property rights being included in GATT, we could be witnessing the birth of a single, truly global market.
But how much of all this is hype? Can India really meet the standards of international competition? And to what extent will production for export lead to domestic shortages and raise prices?
Earlier, tariff barriers had protected domestic industry from international competition. Now, with barriers lowered, protection for Indian industry will be reduced.
No, if we are reducing tariffs, undoubtedly the protection for the home industry in tariff terms is coming down. But since we are also thereby reducing the cost of modernization and upgrading of production facilities, we expect that the domestic industry will come very, very competitive in terms of global price competitive status.
If the Commerce Secretary is not being overly optimistic, this could mean an overall increase in Indian exports from a mere 0.6% of global trade in 1994 to about 1% in 1998. This means that our export earnings could touch $16 billion in 1998 as against $10 billion in 1994. Much of the increase will be a result of developed countries being forced to forsake protectionism and reduce subsidies. This means that countries like the United States and France have to cut agricultural subsidies from more than 20% to 10%. India subsidizes agriculture only to the extent of 6%. As a result, Indian agricultural goods will become much cheaper in comparison, and this will fuel an export boom. Critics of GATT, however, and there are many of them, argue that the removal of barriers will harm our economy.
If you see historically, until 1947 we hardly had tariffs, and therefore we were in a situation where we were, as in modern day terms called open, we were very open. But we had 0.5% rate of growth annually for almost 50 years in the first half of this century. It's only when the economy was managed better internally that we started having a rate of growth which was 9 times greater, which is 4.5% per annum post 1950.
Yeah, this is a completely fallacious argument. to compare the opening up in colonial conditions with opening up in a post-colonial society or an independent society is just not feasible. This is like comparing the opening up of China through gunboat diplomacy in mid-19th century to civilized China with the opening up of China that is occurring today.
Although differences over GATT persist, it is apparent that after the economic crisis of 1991, restructuring of the economy had become inevitable with just enough foreign exchange to import essential commodities for 2 weeks. And with the disintegration of the Soviet Union, a market economy was seen as the only way out. Today, our foreign exchange reserves have reached comfortable levels, and full convertibility of the rupee is just a matter of time. But this has only increased concerns that once India is fully integrated into the world economy under GATT, it will be subject to the uncertainty of market forces. At the heart of the continuing debate is the future status of Indian agriculture. Will countries like France and the United States of America reduce their subsidies from 20% to 10%, or will they find other ways of maintaining payments to bolster agriculture? It is answers to questions such as these that will determine whether cheaper Indian agricultural products can fuel an export boom.
The taste of the pudding is in the eating, and we'll have to see what really happens. And that's why at the end of 6 years, there is an understanding that the whole regime concerning the agricultural sector will again be reviewed and renegotiated.
Renegotiation is perhaps inevitable, depending on how the 100-odd signatories to GATT shape up to international competition. Also inevitable are disputes which are to be settled under the aegis of the World Trade Organization, a body similar to the UN General Assembly. It has already formed a dispute settlement body which will settle problems in a specified time frame. But what most countries are concerned about is the impact of GATT on domestic production. For instance, in 1993, India had to ban the export of cotton because there wasn't enough for the domestic market. And this year, sugar had to be imported, though India is the largest producer of sugarcane in the world.
These fluctuations we cannot totally rule out. They are determined by climatic factors and all. And the realistic policy, I think, for a country like India would be to keep the import option open.
Although a shortfall in production can be made good by imports, economists fear drastic changes in cropping patterns and agricultural relations.
It's also quite likely that the rich farmers may begin to apply pressure that various kinds of land regulation, land reform, that should be changed so that they can have large plantations, they can have economies of scale and other things. In which case these rural marginal farmers, etc., they may also lose the land that they have. And therefore they will have further problems from the point of view of the income side.
This argument was given earlier for the Green Revolution, that wherever Green Revolution occurs, the rich farmer is going to swallow up the small farmer. In fact, it's exactly the opposite that has occurred. In all the Green Revolution areas, it is the small farmer who has been able to subsist because of high technology and because he's able to get much more out of a small farm now.
This seems to be borne out by a 64% increase in agricultural exports over the last 2 years to a phenomenal 8,000 crore rupees. In fact, the Indian farmer, if he transcends the limitations of individual action, could become a successful exporter.
But they will have to form their own cooperatives to export their produce to different parts of the world. If the present system continues, I mean through middleman, if the export is to take place, then the entire profit, I don't think it will percolate down to the farmers.
Perhaps the most contentious issue in this seemingly interesting scenario is the question of seeds. There is apprehension that farmers will be forced to buy seeds from multinationals at steep prices, instead of using their own. Most farmers living on the edge spoke to were uncertain of how GATT would affect them. None of the presumed benefits seem to have been understood by them.
यही हालत रही 20-25 साल के बाद में देश गुलाम हो जाएगा। उन लोगों के पास रहेगा कुछ नहीं, पैसे का क्या है, ये करेंसी चेंज कर देंगे और इस करेंसी को कोई चलाएगा नहीं, उनकी करेंसी हो जाएगी, ये देश क्या करेगा फिर?
अखबारों में तो गवर्नमेंट कहती है कि भाई हमें किसानों के लिए ये कर दिया, वो कर दिया, ऊपर अखबारों में खबर आती है, आज तक किसान या मजदूर के लिए कोई सहूलियत नहीं आई है गाँवों के लिए।
As a result, a consensus on GATT is still elusive. Opinions vary across the spectrum. While the left believes GATT is an attack on sovereignty, the BJP advocates a return to Swadeshi. But everyone agrees that there is need for greater awareness of the implications of GATT for India. For instance, What will be the impact of patents on seeds and research?
What is likely to happen is that there will be a whole range of new patenting of seeds and various other things, in which even though Indian agriculture universities, Indian firms may be doing research, it is quite likely that this area will over a period of time be dominated by the transnational corporations.
Well, I don't think there's a major danger of that happening, because Indian R&D in terms of skills and capabilities is not behind any other country in the world.
In these circumstances, India, with its tremendous biodiversity, could become a major exporter of seeds to the developing world, especially to Africa and Latin America. Besides, India could also be the sole producer of patented plant varieties from medicinal herbs if sustainable utilization can be carried out. And finally, and most importantly, the increased emphasis on agriculture will not only improve infrastructure, but also push up production across the country. The question then is, can India capitalize on GATT by meeting international competition head-on, using sustainable technologies, or will the weight of the past prove overpowering?
Do you know that agricultural waste generated in millions of tons each year is actually an effective fuel? Rice husk and sawdust that lie unutilized on agricultural land can actually be used as an effective substitute for fossil fuels. Priya Somaya reports.
Constituting a disposal problem of mammoth proportions, agricultural waste is often perceived as a byproduct many can do without. But few realize that the millions of tons of agro-industrial waste generated have a hidden potential. Waste like sawdust and rice husk have a high calorific value. This means they burn easily and efficiently and can be an alternative to coal and lignite, a fact more and more people are capitalizing on. Here in the Watwa industrial town near Ahmedabad, a women's cooperative shows how far a little initiative can go. Using a process called briquetting, truckloads of sawdust from nearby mills are dried and put through a machine at a high temperature and pressure. As a result, the sawdust gets compressed into a high-density, high-value fuel called white coal.
This agro waste is converted into the dense, fuel, and this dense fuel is as good as the steam coal, and then it is this can be used for the cooking purpose or any industrial use.
Although it is now viable as an industrial fuel, white coal was originally intended as an alternative to firewood for the rural community. Over 30 women working in a cooperative first produced the coal, but village women seemed wary of the fuel and it found few takers. So Dr. Kulshresht decided to market it to nearby industrial units. Whether it's brick kilns or factories with boilers, white coal is a cheaper alternative to lignite. Besides, the high calorific value of white coal and the high density of the briquettes helps the temperature remain constant. And finally, and most importantly, white coal does not emit sulfur, which corrodes furnaces and pollutes the air.
White coal में तो धुआं कम ही निकलेगा क्योंकि लकड़ी का बना होता है टोटली सो डस्ट है वो, और कोयला जो है, कोयला तो आप जानते हैं कि खानों में से निकलता है, तो उसमें तो मतलब धुआं ज़्यादा निकलना है। इससे एनवायरनमेंट हर तरह से बेनिफिट देखा जाए तो व्हाइट कोल में ज़्यादा बेनिफिट है।
The cost of lignite and white coal is almost the same. I mean, there is not a big difference. So definitely we are preferring this material because it is giving us better service. We are in a position to maintain our temperature, pressure in a better way.
Why is it कि अभी भी आप lignite coal use कर रहे हैं?
We are using lignite still because their production is very less. So they are unable to feed us whatever is our requirement.
This means that the commercial viability of white coal is already established. The only factor militating against the widespread use is low availability. But Dr. Kulshrestha believes that cooperatives run by farmers and sawmill owners, or where waste is generated, can meet the shortfall. Besides,
ये वैसे देखा जाए तो काफ़ी अच्छी इंडस्ट्री है, एनवायरनमेंट फ्रेंडली है, पॉल्यूशन फ्री होने से इवन जो फ्यूल है उससे कम पॉल्यूशन होता है. दूसरा टैक्स बेनिफिट्स है इंडस्ट्री पर बिकॉज इट्स ए नॉन कन्वेंशनल यूनिट.
The Ganga river system drains about 1/4 of India's land area. If properly cultivated and developed, this area could grow enough crops to feed the whole world.